So our session tonight, sponsored by Seniors for Social Action Ontario, is going to focus on how communities can create their own options. And we're going to focus on the Mount Community Centre in Peterborough, Ontario. This is a really interesting development that's been going on since 2013. And our presenter tonight is Stephen Kylie. And Stephen is a lawyer. And I would say, having talked to him a couple of times, that he's a community builder extraordinaire. He's been practicing law in Peterborough since 1980. And he's been president and chair of the Mount Community Centre since its inception in 2013. So we're delighted, Stephen, to have you here tonight. This is going to be a really interesting presentation and discussion. Stephen's going to discuss how the Mount Community Centre was created, some of the challenges that they've dealt with, and many of them they've overcome, and some of the kind of supports and services that they're delivering to the community. So welcome, Stephen. Delighted to have you here, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much for that introduction, John, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you tonight about the Mount Community Centre, something in the Peterborough area here that we're very proud of. I would say that I think Harry's going to have some slides rolling in the split screen. I won't be speaking to those slides. We just wanted to roll through the deck to give you an idea about the nature of the property that we own and have redeveloped. Some of these they tend to be more historical pictures, so they were taken in the earlier stages of the redevelopment, but it really does give you a sense about the size of the building, the capacity, and the opportunities for growth and redevelopment. To talk about the Mount Community Centre, we have to first go back to the roots of the Peterborough Poverty Reduction Network. That's a good slide there where it sets out the mission and vision of the Mount Community Centre. The Peterborough Poverty Reduction Network was formed in about 2008, and it was created at the suggestion of our then Mayor Paul Ayotte, because Paul really wanted to get going on some initiatives to reduce or at least alleviate poverty in our community. And although he created something in the nature of a cabinet, that group morphed over time into what's now known as the Peterborough Poverty Reduction Network, or what we affectionately refer to as the PPRN. So I'll probably refer to the PPRN tonight. The Mount Community Centre, which comes along a little bit later, is affectionately referred to as TMCC. So the Poverty Reduction Network is a nonprofit corporation with charitable status. It was incorporated at the time for specific mandates, and it still exists today. And if there's time at the end, I'm kind of proud to share with you the next growth in the history of the PPRN. When the PPRN was created in about 2008-09, there was some work on poverty reduction going on in our community already, but not particularly well organized. So we had good groups looking at housing issues and food security. But there are other areas involved in poverty reduction that weren't really being addressed. So the intent of the PPRN was to act kind of as an umbrella group and to be the glue or the coordinator of a Peterborough poverty reduction plan that would bring in the other determinants of poverty. So it really had 5 pillars or action steps. One was to look at affordable housing. And when I use the word affordable tonight, I'll try and use low income. When I read about affordability in the Toronto newspapers, what they're talking about is young people buying their first home and not being able to afford the mortgage. Well, that's not what we mean here by affordability. Affordability is people of low income that just don't have the ability even to pay rent and utilities. The second pillar was on food security. And we were pretty strong at that time under the leadership of our medical officer of health. We created an income security team. We created an employment and training team. And we also created a basic needs team, which dealt with sort of health and dental care. Those were the 5 pillars of the PPRN work. And each one of those areas had an assigned work group that would work on specific plans for poverty reduction in those areas. But the strength of the network was to bring them all together in a collaborative way. because up until that point, they weren't, well, some of them didn't even exist, but they weren't really collaborating with one another because we know all of these pillars overlap. Starts with housing, no question about it, but they all overlap, they're all connected. We actually eventually rolled out a sixth pillar or mandate, and we called it Neighbors in Action because back then we started to realize that to get services in the community to the people that needed them, the best way to do it was to get to their neighborhoods, because a lot of low-income people, they don't have a car, a phone, TV, computer. So we wanted to get those services available to them at a local level. And we started out with a school in Peterborough, and it was a huge success. And it was about that time, not to spend a lot of time on the Neighbors in Action part, but that's when Premier Wynne actually came out with a concept of using hub development as a tool. And she even had a director of hub development who came to a strategic planning forum in Peterborough at one time. So I was the chair. I think John mentioned I was the inaugural chair of the PBRN. Paul, I had asked me if I would chair this committee, but I eventually got back at Paul because I recruited him to be a volunteer at the Mount Community Center, and he's been an awesome volunteer. So that umbrella group was very strategic, working collaboratively, but it wound up being a very large organization. We had volunteers, agencies, faith groups, business and industry, school boards, all made up part of this collaborative planning process, all with a view to reducing poverty. But there was an annual strategic planning forum that we were all at, and this would be about 2011 or 12. And we went through our poverty reduction plan, and everybody came to the conclusion that the individual work groups were doing fabulous work. Everybody was working collaboratively, and the targets we had for the poverty reduction plan were still appropriate. But we looked at all the people in the room and we thought, can we not kind of mobilize this group and bring them all together and share what they have, their resources, their staff, their finances, whatever, and maybe take on a larger scale project? Well, it was a great conversation we had at that point, and everybody agreed, yes, let's pursue something like that. So that big goal, bring everybody together, instead of working kind of one apartment at a time through your housing committee, maybe the Peterborough Poverty Reduction Network could take on something larger. So we agreed as a group that if we could find a property that could accommodate low-income housing and provide a center for dealing with issues of food insecurity, that would be huge, because we sort of identified those as the two biggest needs in our area at the time. And we know, I think it's pretty clear that housing is the core. It's the center of it all. And even though all the pillars overlap and work together, if we can provide safe and affordable housing for low-income individuals, they will have the strength and energy then. If they don't have to worry about where they're going to be sleeping that night, they can pay their rent. They'll have that strength and energy to go do interviews, look for jobs, and even maybe start their own businesses. So we formed a bit of a committee to start looking at surplus industrial properties in our area that might accommodate this larger scale idea. And I linked up with a friend of mine, a realtor at the time, a commercial realtor, Bill Pyle, who he and I worked together a lot. But this building that we're looking at, the former convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Peterborough, we had actually been involved in that property a couple of times before, so we knew about it. But Bill sent me this electronic listing, as he just often did, to let me know what properties were available. And I never thought about this property as being sort of the right property for the kind of vision we had. And I got thinking about it after, so I reached out to Bill, and we sort of thought, this is worth pursuing. You know, this is worth going for. We never thought in a million years we could ever make it happen. But if you don't try something, it's not going to happen. And I think we've all learned that we have to think big. We have to take some challenges and some risks. And if you don't pursue it, it's not going to happen. So the Sisters of St. Joseph had actually sold this glorious building to a Western-based developer about 5 years before, because they were downsizing, and they built a LEED-rated new building right beside this big building. And it had sat idle for those 5 years. There was no heat, no power, no water. The owner really kind of let it go as they were trying to figure out whether to develop or not. But when our team started going through the building and looking around it, we thought this building has huge potential for what we had envisioned. I mean, if you talk about the property itself, the main mother house building had 132,000 square feet of space. Actually, that space we're looking at there now was their second chapel, and we converted it into a public assembly area. It sits on 10 acres of land right in the middle of the city of Peterborough. The original farmhouse for this property still exists today, and it has huge capacity and opportunity for growth. The sisters, of course, when they were there, they also had a large-scale commercial kitchen and a large dining room. I mean, there was nothing in it. Those areas, when you see the slides coming up, those areas were pretty tired and beat up by the time we took the property over. But in other words, I mean, this building had everything in place that would be necessary to build out the plan we had. So the ad hoc committee that was looking at these properties and our board were getting pretty excited about this as an opportunity. Again, never actually thinking we could pull this off. So we went back to our partners, community partners. So it's the PPRN that's taking the lead, but we involved CMHA, Cohorta Participation Projects, which is a housing provider providing accommodation for people living with disability. United Way, Habitat for Humanity, YWCA, which was focused on the food security piece, and the Peterborough Housing Corporation, which was the social housing provider for the city of Peterborough. So we brought all these experts into the room to start talking about this project. And isn't it something the community could get behind? I mean, we had many meetings with these groups and other groups, but it became clear that the group was saying, let's have a shot at this. We don't know where it's going. We don't know what it'll look like, but let's have a shot at it. So my friend Bill Pyle, who eventually became a member of the board at the Mount Community Center, and unfortunately we lost him a couple of years ago. He passed away, and it was just one of those lieutenants that you have working with you, you know, in a project that makes these things happen. And we were so upset that we lost him. But Bill and I worked on a letter of intent that went to this Western-based company because they do business. They were from Alberta. They do business differently in Alberta in terms of property sales than we do maybe in Ontario. So we started out with a letter of intent, which is what they wanted. And so we set out a plan in that letter of intent for actually acquiring the property from them. Again, never thinking in a million years we would ever pull it off. And along this path, as Bill and I are working on this paperwork, Bill learned that there was a large-scale Canadian developer that was interested in buying this 10-acre parcel, tearing down the mother house and building some massive high-rise building, and would have paid a lot more for it, much more than what the owner got out of our group eventually. But you know, it was curious, and this is the first game changer that we witnessed. This owner wanted to deal with us because they loved this grassroots initiative, and we filled them in on the detail. They wanted to be part of it, they wanted to support it, and they wanted to give the community a chance to have a go at it. So they just basically said to that other potential buyer, no, we're not interested. So we submitted our letter of intent, and it was accepted eventually in December of 2012. And as you might expect, we built in all the typical due diligence conditions as you would expect in a deal of this time. And we had until June of 2013, so quite a bit of time to assess those conditions. We had a very small staff. I mean, how do you take on a project of this magnitude and ask all the right questions? So once again, we go back to our community partners and we formed some due diligence committees. One, of course, was finance, building assessment, visioning and communication. So our finance committee actually consisted of many representatives from our agency. So these were finance people, and some of them were actually CFOs associated with our agencies who were supporting us. They did more pro formas and cash projections on this property than you can imagine. I mean, there was no way we were going to know exactly where we were headed, but we were kind of determining the potential of revenue generation, creating the affordable apartments, and also a capital budget at the same time. So we had a pretty good idea what it was going to take to accomplish those ends. But because we didn't really have anything solid in front of us, we didn't know quite where that was going. We did actually work on a risk mitigation strategy because we were a nonprofit corporation with no history, very well, not history in terms of property development, and no, very little assets. And so we had this risk mitigation strategy, so if things didn't go the way we hoped they would go, we would have an exit strategy. We had 10 or 12 different exit strategies if this project didn't work out for us, if and when we were able to close the deal. The Building Assessment Committee reviewed an engineering study that had been prepared by the owner, a very comprehensive engineering study. That members of that team, which included a fellow I had recruited, he was a retired chief building official from the city of Peterborough. You just got to get the right people in the right places. They knew everything there was to know about that building. So when we bought the building, eventually, we knew what the challenges were and we knew what the opportunities were. So the due diligence committees, the agencies, the partners, they said, let's go for it. We don't quite know where we're going yet, and there's risk involved here for sure, but we have to have a shot at it. The only problem with that is no one was prepared to sign on the dotted line except the PPRN. So it comes back to the PPRN board, which had maybe 8 to 10 members, and they had to make that gut-wrenching decision. Do we do this deal? Because we're the ones signing on the contract. And those people were interested in poverty alleviation strategies. They weren't necessarily developers or planners or marketing strategists. So they made that gut-wrenching decision that yes. And I remember one young lady, and we lost her unfortunately too. She was a very smart person who lived with disability and brought so much to the PPRN board. And she basically said, we cannot let this go. This may never ever happen in our community again. You know, we have to have a shot at it. We have to have a shot at it. We have to do it. And after that little presentation, the board ratified it and decided, yes, we're going to go ahead, lift the conditions and close the deal. So just kind of details of how we went about the purchase. So PPRN had already incorporated the Mount Community Center board before the deal closed on August 3rd, 2013, because we knew that the skill set for doing this purchase, the redevelopment, the management of it, the renting of it, we needed a different skill set. So we were going to create a sister organization, another nonprofit corporation with charitable status that would be responsible for the redevelopment of this property. And the PPRN would continue on with its poverty reduction plan. So we got the Mount Community Center incorporated in time, but they didn't have a charitable status before August 3rd, 2013. And the charitable status of the PPRN was a huge component of us putting our acquisition capital together. And I would say again, I may have said it a couple of times, but working with this Western-based company was a pleasure and it was a game changer because they weren't out to get every last dollar out of this project. They really wanted to do things to help us along the way, and I'll come back to that in a minute or two. So this property was valued in 2013 at about 5.2 million. We didn't have that kind of money, nor did we pay that for the property. But that's the value of this asset that you're looking at right now. And that's a neat picture of one of the first apartments that we built out in phase 1. They were really nice, clean, new apartments. So we didn't pay the 5.2 million, but we still have to work on an acquisition capital plan according to the letter of intent we had submitted. Out of the blue, we got a donation from a group that had been monitoring the work we had been doing, figured we'd probably need some money, a down payment or whatever. And they came through with a significant donation. We weren't even out fundraising. We didn't think there'd be enough time to do it. That significant donation actually wound up being our down payment. But the down payment wasn't going to conclude the deal with the owner. The owner gave us, and this is why, I mean, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You're going to hear from me all these crazy opportunities we pursued. And the thing is, if you don't ask about those opportunities, you're not going to realize them. So we asked this company if they would take back a mortgage at a preferred rate. And they agreed because, again, they wanted to see this be successful. They weren't about maximizing profits. So they held a mortgage on this property for 3 years, which would give us enough time to get the wheels of the redevelopment going. We also approached a social lender that we had been introduced to for a smaller loan. And with the amount of that acquisition capital, we actually arranged a surplus. Well, enough of a reserve or a surplus in the budget that would carry this building for 1.5 years if nothing otherwise happened. Because There was no rent. We were going to have to put money into expenditures immediately. But that reserve would allow us comfortably to continue on with the planning, knowing we were going to be able to pay the expenses going forward. In the end, charitable receipting was the huge deal maker here. I won't get into that in any detail here, but using the PPRN's charitable status and buying that property on August 3rd was a game changer. It was absolutely huge. Along the way, this property owner, not only did they give us a great deal on the purchase and they're holding a mortgage, they also agreed to pay for the replacement of the very steep roof that was above the Sisters Chapel, which is now referred to as the Austin Doran Hall. That was not a cheap replacement. And they did that as a favor to us because they really believed in what we were trying to do. They also gave us a cash infusion. I forgot exactly how much because they knew we couldn't just go in and turn the boilers on. In fact, we knew we'd have to replace the boilers. So just amazing dealing with this organization, the seller. So as I mentioned, the deal closed August 3rd, 2013. The PPRN then transferred the property to TMCC on December 31st, 2013, after it had obtained its charitable status. So from that date going forward, TMCC is the owner of the property, responsible for the development and redevelopment of the property, and the PPRN continues on with its poverty reduction work. But these are sister organizations. They continue to collaborate. And I may, if there's a chance later, I'll share some of that continued collaboration with you. Up until then, as the chair, I was sort of saying to the people who were recruiting on these due diligence committees, give us your best shot up until June. Help us figure out whether this is a manageable deal or not. And at the end of the due diligence period, whether we waived it or haven't waived it, you've done your time. You've helped us out. And at that point, you can either leave, and we appreciate the service, or you can stay on if you want. We'd love to have you stay on. I would say most of the people, except for the staff for our agencies, stayed on with us in one capacity or another, which was huge. So at that point, going forward, we needed sort of a management tool in place. So we created these committees, executive finance, of course. We had a health and social service group because we wanted to introduce health programs through the VON and other health agencies into the building, and also adding opportunities for our tenants that they could be engaged in cultural programs and things like that. We were focused on environmental and sustainability at that point as well. And we had a food service committee because we knew eventually we were going to build out that food center eventually. So it was a bit of a, no, I wouldn't use the word miracle, but certainly game changers to get to the point where we actually have the deed for this place. So now that we own it, what do we do? Because we didn't have any money. The money we got, $25,000 from the PPRN, was the deposit on the purchase, and then the TMCC had to pay that money back to PPRN. This is a vacant building, very tired. We were heading into winter. Winter was coming up, and we knew we needed to generate revenue pretty quickly. But we also had the security of knowing we had that reserve fund in place that would carry us. Many features, you can tell from the slides, many features were heritage designated. So we had to kind of deal with the heritage piece going forward, which we wouldn't change anyway, but as it's a classic adaptive reuse of a historical building being used for current contemporary needs. So we tried to work on strategies for moving forward with the redevelopment of a massive building that had no heat, no power, no nothing at that time. So we knew right from talking about this that we needed to have non-residential tenants in the space with us. So we would provide low-income housing for sure. That was the #1 goal. But we were going to bring non-residential tenants into the space as well, share some of that 132,000 square feet, because they can provide supports and services for people living in the building, working in the building, or even the broader public. So the second key is that those groups pay commercial rents, and we needed the commercial rents to subsidize or support the affordability part of the project. I couldn't imagine anybody these days building just a low-income housing project. completely unsustainable. And I'd love somebody to prove me wrong on that, but I don't think so. So we knew we needed those groups right out of the chute, and we've had many of them. I may highlight them later if there's time, but the VON, Victorian Order of Nurses, was in from day one. Looking at this slide here, that's the former kitchen of the sisters. But VON could see past this. They could see the dream that we were moving forward, and they wanted us to build a space for them for an adult daycare program. So that comes up to the definition of what I call the first phase. So the other strategy, we're going to do this incrementally. We can't build out 132,000 square feet. So the building was divided kind of conveniently into three wings, A, B, and C. Well, A was the newer wing, built in the 1960s. So we were going to have a shot at that first because we thought it might be easier, relatively easier to redevelop it. It was about 40,000 square feet. So we were going to do it incrementally as we have the funds available to proceed. So in that first phase, that A wing, oh, there's the check presentation that I'm going to mention a little bit later. Big check presentation for the purposes of our kitchen center. So we decided to go with phase one, which would be to redevelop the A wing with 43 apartments and a space for the VON. And the space for the VON was immediately adjoining that 4-story building where we were going to build those apartments. So we did all of that together in phase one, knowing that we'd have rents coming in from the 43 apartments, but the VON is going to be paying us commercial rent for their space and really providing a super support service to people in our community. We know what that means. It's usually seniors that have some cognitive issues. This was a fantastic plan that we were proud to be a part of. They also had an overnight respite program as part of that phase one, the adult day program. We made the assumption at that point, because we had no financial integrity at all, that the banks wouldn't be interested in talking with us. But we also kind of assumed and had the expectation that if we could finish that phase one, we'd have some financial integrity. And maybe then we could sit down with the banks and look at a financial model moving forward. Okay, so that was the strategy. Phase one, 43 apartments and the VON space. So again, how do we do that? Well, first we designed a budget, and it was a estimated budget of 4.5 to 4.7 million for a group that doesn't have that kind of money. So we weren't sure just how to go about it, but step one, we approached the city of Peterborough, the city council. And we went to the city council and we're going to ask them for some money for this project. We didn't have a clue how much to ask for, no idea. So $1 million sounded like a good number. I didn't know if that was embarrassingly high or whether it was low. I had no idea at all. We just went to the city council. We asked them for $1 million. There was hardly a conversation about it. They endorsed it unanimously. The only question I remember that night was from our then Mayor Daryl Bennett. And Daryl said, the only question I have is, why didn't you ask for more money? Well, I guess we would have had we known that you were receptive to it, but we were content with the $1 million. So the city committed to $1 million into our project. 600,000 of that comes from the senior levels of government through IHA funding or investment in affordable housing. So it wasn't really their money, but they distributed it as the service manager. But the city did kick in 400,000 over 2 years out of their own coffers. So the city came through with us. We had $1 million for the 4.7. We still had a distance to go. Then we go to the county of Peterborough. And the county wasn't really prepared to make a grant to us, but they had very solid reserves that weren't generating any interest. That was a period, if you remember, low interest rates. So we actually convinced them to loan to us of $1.7 million at a preferred rate of interest, but it was still more than they were getting in their own investments. So we worked out a plan with the county and they made that happen. They treated it like a construction loan and would do advances to us periodically. So that gets us up to 2.7, I think. So we still have a piece to go. In the meantime, the city of Peterborough, this is an interesting plan, and I suspect most urban municipalities have this in place. They had something called a community improvement plan, where if there's a developer who's interested in building low-income housing, they will incent you to do that by giving you preferential treatment on your development charges, building permits, rezoning. And we took advantage of all of that, but that's more operational than sort of the capital. So we needed the extra $2 million, and we didn't think there was any time to start up a large capital campaign. It was going to take a while to do that. So we came up with this kind of a notion about, okay, there may be Peterborough area residents, and by that I mean the city and the county, who might be prepared to make a small donation into the project, but they might be prepared to loan something into the project if there's an expectation of repayment, especially with some kind of a return on that investment. So this sounds like a good idea, and I've done a fair amount of private lending work in my law practice, and I was pretty familiar with these strategies, but we decided this sounds kind of cool. Let's take it to the community and see what happens. So we organized 10 to 12 seminars where we invited sort of people we knew, friends to the Mount Community Center, friends of the Sisters of St. Joseph, because we were updating their former convent. And we had about 12 of those seminars. We also had people going to the churches on Sundays at worship time and doing presentations about what was happening at the Mount Community Center. And by the way, if you're interested in helping us, this is the way you can help us. So it's a bit of a complex plan we put together, but the idea was that people could invest money into the Mount. It would be part of a syndicated pool of assets, but that pool of assets would be secured by one mortgage registered against the property. And I had a Peterborough lawyer lined up as a friend. He wasn't going to charge me for this, but he agreed to hold the mortgage in trust for all of those investors. So we started rolling this out, and people at the seminars, they wanted to sign up right then and there. You mean I can roll money into the Mount Community Center and you can start building? Possibly, depending on how much we raise. So I won't spend too much time on this because there's quite a bit to it, but we did set a limit on this investment plan at $2 million because that would get us to the 4.7. We suggested that people who are interested in loaning money into the Mount would do a minimum of $5,000 loans, because anything less than that, we figured it was going to amount to a lot of administration in managing those investments. We would offer those investors 3% interest, which again was a great interest rate at the time, and a wonderful interest rate to a nonprofit corporation that's just getting its feet on the ground and rolling through a redevelopment. With now we have a bit of a financial history, but before then we didn't have any. And for each person that did make a loan into that pot, that syndicated pot of assets, we would issue them what we call the Mount Bond. It's kind of similar to a Canada Savings Bond. It was basically a promise to pay. So if you loan $5,000 into the Mount, we give you the Mount Bond, which is a promise to pay. And it also highlights the fact that it's part of a secured mortgage. We also learned a few other things along the way, that these investments were qualified investments for self-directed RSPs. We had people that had cash in their RSPs, they couldn't take it out without paying the taxes on. So they were actually loaning money into the Mount out of their self-directed RSPs. It was a magnificent plan. It took us a long time to put it together, but I would say at the end of the day, 1/4 of the funds we raised in the social finance plan came from self-directed RSPs. We had people actually making their annual contribution into the plan so that they can loan the money out of the plan back to the Mount. So it was quite a success story. We sold out the $2 million in a very short period of time, 6 months. Now they weren't all, personal investors at say 5,000, but the community foundation Greater Peterborough got on board. They were starting to roll out this idea of impact investing, and they kind of wanted to build up a process or a policy. So they actually bought some of our bonds as well. So there were some significant agencies that were buying more than $5,000 bonds. So we now had the 4.7 million. We were ready to go. And so the social finance plan that we developed on our own, which now has actually been mirrored by some other groups, that is a huge game changer for us. Without that original down payment, without a willing seller on the other end, and without our social finance plan, I'm sure we're not where we are today. So the interesting thing is we didn't even have to comply with the Ontario securities regulations, which you would in this kind of an investment, because we were a non-profit corporation. We were exempt, which boggled my mind, but it was a bit of a blessing. But we still did the same stuff. We did a prospectus, we did a business case, and we handed these materials out to anybody that was prepared to invest in the mount. You know, just as a bit of a rant, and John was talking earlier, I think, about petitioning the senior levels of government. I never understood why the senior levels of government don't get involved in incenting impact investing. I've been petitioning the ministers that I've known over the years. I think there might be some work going on there, but why wouldn't they make it easier for groups to invest in their communities? It doesn't cost them any money. You know, you might make a tax deduction available or loosen up the rules on RSP investing. They could do something wonderful to allow our communities to invest in ourselves. And I don't know why that hasn't happened, but I'll keep lobbying for that. It's like back in the early 90s when we were building some RGI apartments. The province didn't provide the capital for those builds. They went out and secured the financing for us. So the individual developers had the mortgages, but the province put it all together. It didn't cost them anything. I don't know why we don't have that kind of thinking going on these days. We can do such wonderful things if we just have some limited cooperation from the senior levels of government. Our Chamber of Commerce has been talking, I'm sorry to get out on the side, but this is kind of important to me, that our Chambers of Commerce have been talking about using vehicles like REITs or real estate investment trusts, that you could create something like that and you could make an investment into it, because the holder of that trust wants to go out and build a new affordable housing project, or you know, it could be a health service firm, or it could be health or recreation. It doesn't have to be social. And again, we have those opportunities. It's just too bad when we have to create these ideas ourselves. So we started into phase one, the 43 apartments in the VON space. We pretty well knew what we were up against from the building assessment. But yeah, we ran into stuff, you know, asbestos that was behind the walls and dangerous substances. In that first phase, the 4-story building, we were taking down interior block walls because we would take sort of 3 smaller offices, take down the interior walls and open it up into a larger apartment space. Lo and behold, the paint on those block walls was lead based. So we had to go through a very complicated disposal routine. All those blocks had to be carted out of there and disposed of the licensed disposal place. And that cost us money we weren't expecting. But really, that was all attainable. These are blips along the way that you're going to find the capital to make it happen. But our biggest challenge in that phase one that we learned going forward, when we were designing that space, we were going to build electric heat, because at the time, the difference in the capital cost between electric and gas was huge, significant. So, you know, we don't have the capital to build out a gas-fired system. So we'll go with electric. But, you know, we started paying attention to what was going on in the utilities market back then. And there was a real fear that the cost of electricity was going through the roof. And I don't know where we are on that today, maybe not quite as bad as we were thinking back then. But we thought, no, there's just no way we can put electric heat in there, because it's going to catch up to us operationally and we're going to be paying significant utilities charges. So we came to the conclusion we had to do a gas-fired hydronic hot water heating system. But it was going to cost us an extra $700,000 to $800,000 in addition to our base budget to do that. And of course, we didn't have that money beyond the 4.7 million. So the choices we had were to just stop, give it up, and maybe go out and find some funds, go to electric, which we weren't going to electric. But in the meantime, we were introduced to a mechanical financier, I'll call them. These are the types of lenders that they handle your furnaces and air conditioning systems. So you can finance the installation of a furnace, say, and you can either do it on a lease or a purchase with a loan. They're really expert at those kinds of deals. And this group was looking to, this one particular group was looking to expand their portfolio and move beyond that kind of a successful market they have, but they weren't quite thinking about anything we had in mind. So we were looking for them to help us finance that increase in the mechanical costs. And we spent a lot of time working with them, meeting with them. They like the seller, were really excited about what we were trying to do. And to make a long story short, they agreed to finance the increase in the mechanical costs. So we, all of a sudden, we found that, I forget the exact amount, it was like 760,000, something like that. They financed that for us. So they put the capital injection into the budget. We offered them the system as security. There's no way they're going to come and take the system out. They were really trusting us in our plan and our ability to pay. So we entered into sort of a 10-year lease deal with an option to buy the system back at the end of the lease for $1. So it was just a different way of financing that equipment upgrade, that we weren't going to get that financing from anywhere else. And that was a blessing. That was a game changer. We're 7.5, close to 8 years into that project. We've never missed a payment. And I think in the early years, I would hear from the president fairly regularly, how are you doing? I want your audited statements. Haven't heard from the president in the last couple of years. So this was a huge success story for us and another big game changer. So when we finished phase one, the 43 apartments and the VON space, and we had revenue coming in, this is another game changer because we were right. That gave us financial integrity that allowed us to sit down with the banks. So we actually did secure takeout financing with a local financial institution who's been with us from that point and are still with us today in a couple of different projects we're working on. With that revenue coming in and that phase one build-out, we had enough financial integrity to qualify for takeout financing. So we paid out the county, we paid out the social lender, and we paid out the bondholders. The bondholders were shocked. They never thought they'd even get their money back. And then they're even more shocked because we paid them out so early, you know, because they really liked the connection with the project, you know. So some of them actually just turned around and, well, some of them donated the money back to the Mount Community Center, and some of them actually signed promissory notes or something because they didn't want to leave the project at that point. The financing that we arranged through that lender was a huge game changer because not only did we have takeout financing for phase one, we had enough of a facility to then move into phase two. So I think John, I still have a few minutes to go. The story's not quite complete yet. So next phase, we're trying to figure out what's our next phase. We're moving into the middle wing now, which the sister will call it B wing. And we had a choice. We could either concentrate on 10 new low-income apartments, or we could concentrate on building out the food center. We were really focused on having this commercial kitchen up, you know, state-of-the-art facility that we would use for education and training. We were leaning towards the apartments because they generate revenue as soon as occupancy is granted. But then in the meantime, we had that donation that I referenced in an earlier slide. A $300,000 donation came in, an anonymous gift through the Community Foundation Greater Peterborough, and it had to be directed to the food center. So the community was starting to understand who we were and what we were doing, you know, so that allowed us to shift gears. We left the 10 apartments behind for a sec, and we focused in on building out the food center, which was about a $700,000 budget. Another game changer, the check presentation that came up in an earlier slide. The chair of our food hub committee, who was the chair of the local St. Vincent de Paul Society, a huge supporter. When she was doing her little speech at that check presentation, she described this kitchen build out as the miracle on Monaghan Road. Monaghan Road is where the Mount is situated, and that catchphrase, that brand has stayed with us right until today. I'll maybe mention that in a sec too. So I could spend a lot of time talking about the success of the food center. So there was the actual kitchen area, and we also had an adjoining cafe. So the kitchen area had all brand new state-of-the-art commercial equipment that was being used to prepare meals. Like we were involved in Meals on Wheels. We were involved in delivering meals to the tenants in our building. We had a great relationship with a group in Peterborough called Community Training and Development Center, and they were renting our kitchen to train unemployed or underemployed individuals in culinary expertise. So these individuals could go out and gain employment or start their own businesses. Some of them were going to try and start out on their own, but this was to give a leg up. And then this group actually brought in PSW training as part of the culinary program. So cross training. It was a huge successful plan, and we were just proud to be part of it because it's all focused on poverty reduction, quality of life, and all that sort of stuff. And we were rolling along beautifully until COVID hit. And didn't COVID mess us all up? I mean, we had to shut down that whole facility, except there was a component of it that was considered an essential service. So we were able to keep that small part of the kitchen center going, but otherwise, boy, we had to shut the whole thing down. The cafe that became a hub for tenants, trades, contractors, staff, visitors, it was shut down, and we were missing that, the ability of all these groups to come together and socialize with one another. So we're back now, building it back up again, and creating all of these the benefits that we saw before COVID hit. So then the next phase, we were going to build out the 10 apartments in B wing. So we did the food center. We had capital through investment affordable housing, some anyway. We were going to build the 10 apartments in the middle wing, B wing. 10 more apartments. And at the same time, we were introduced to a group of families called Shared Dreams for Shared Dreams. Well, I forgot what the whole corporate name is, but it's a group of 5 families. They all have adult sons with intellectual and physical disabilities. And they know the government's not really in this space helping anybody with funding or housing supports or anything like that. And I actually come across this in my law practice a lot. So they're worried about what happens to their adult children when they can no longer care for them, or they may not be living any longer. So they were looking for a common housing model that they could make available for these 5 men, all of whom knew each other. They were all friends. So we actually put a plan together with the Shared Dreams families, and we offered them space right in the middle of our building. So there's diversity of sort of tenants and housing. They have access throughout the building to the cafe or to what's now the Austin Doran Hall for things like musical performances and that. So to make a long story short, we built out a magnificent space for them. I kind of made the mistake of sort of saying, you kind of design the space the way you want it, because I'm not sure what all the needs are. So I didn't know too much about lifts, lower the windows, make sure everything's fully accessible, even beyond the minimum accessibility targets. So they have a magnificent space. Those men are tickled, and so are the families to be part of this project. So we did all 15 at the same time. We did the 10 apartments, and these 5 suites, we call them, make up the Shared Dreams common housing model. At this point, we're up to 58 apartments, and we're not done. We're still going. Anytime we find capital, we're ready to keep going. And we learned a strategy before that if we have the spaces kind of designed and the capital comes along, we can say, if it's the city or whoever, we'll spend your money. We're ready to go. And here's the plans and what they look like. So the next phase was another 5 apartments. We go back to the A wing because there's a part of the A wing that we set aside for a bit because we didn't have the capital for it. We went back to the A wing and finished off another 5 apartments, which brought us up to 63. And in January, we just opened up the doors for the next 5 we built. It brings us up to 68. So right now, we've hit the target that we gave to the city back in 2013 of the 65. We've gone beyond the 65 and we're still going. But interesting enough that there's enough time up until this last 5 apartments, you know, people would apply to the Mount Community Center, and if they met the income thresholds, we could interview them, and if they're going to fit within the diverse community that is the Mount Community Center, we could offer them accommodation. But this last round was completely different because the city of Peterborough, like any other urban center, is dealing with homeless issues, housing issues, and also sort of health-related and connected issues. And the city was really interested in taking people who had been unhoused and allowing them to get a chance to succeed in a brand new apartment at the Mount Community Center. And we knew this would be challenging because most of these individuals who are unhoused are going to have, you know, other issues in their lives. That's maybe one reason they are unhoused. But the key was that the city would make the program available and they would have support services. They'd have to provide full wraparound services for these tenants because they were going to need even more services than our existing tenants, right? So we've now filled those units with these individuals who were up until that point unhoused. They were bigger units. one 3-bedroom and 4 2-bedrooms. We were moving families into this space. So families that were living in motels, one fellow and his 4 kids had been living in a shelter for 8 months. So he was absolutely tickled to be moving into the space at the Mount. But they have to work hard at making sure they'll succeed. And the agencies providing the supports for them have to work hard to make sure everybody succeeds. But I think this is a really interesting model moving forward. The city calls it transitional housing. I'm not sure I call it that, but it's an interesting model where we can actually provide accommodation for individuals who have been historically unhoused. So we're proud to be part of that plan. And again, we're proud to be part of all these diverse types of housing models. Most of what happened in phase 1, these were for single adults for the most part, because we were constrained by space. We did have some 2-bedrooms that they could be used like for couples. We had a mother-daughter living in one, but we couldn't really accommodate the families until we moved into this last phase and we could build these bigger units. Great overhead shots of what we own and what we've been working on. So currently at TMCC in Peterborough, we have the 68 apartments. We have 11 more designed, as I shared our strategy with you. We have 11 designed, and as soon as the capital comes in the door, we can start building them. And then with those 11, we will have completely retrofit that whole building you're looking at right now. Of course, we have the food center and the cafe, just magnificent spaces. We also have the original farmhouse. We called it Woodland House. And when we first took this building over, we rented it out to a new Canadian family. And they were there for quite a few years. And they did very well. They were very successful, and their families were kind of concentrating in the Toronto area. So they gave up their tenancy at the Mount in the Woodland House. But then we offered that space to, I don't know how broad this group is, Trish, you would probably know, but in Peterborough, it's called Senior Women Living Together. And it's an individual that we've been working with that provides accommodation for senior women that probably would really struggle to be living on their own because they have limited income, because maybe they've lost their husbands or there's been a divorce or something like that, and they have limited income. This model allows, there's 4 women as far as I know at this point, living together in that house, and they're sharing the expenses. They're getting quite a lot out of living together in that kind of an accommodation. But to me, it's bigger than that. It's about sort of the safety network of living together, and it's about the social piece where you have people interacting with one another. I think it's a magnificent plan. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more of the shared dreams models, and I think we're going to see more of the city's transitional housing models going forward. Just want to say something about our non-residential tenants. They're huge in our building. They're amazing to work with. But dare I say again, they pay us the commercial rents that are absolutely critical to the success of this place. And they also provide necessary services. So I mentioned about the VON creating the adult day program. They are still there today. In fact, they're wanting to extend their lease for another 10 years. They just love the space they have. It's safe, it's secure, and they have access to the outdoors. So their clients can get, outdoors, fresh air, walking out in the grass, and there's places to sit down. And I mentioned before, they have the overnight respite program, which I think is a huge blessing as well. We have Court, the land trust sharing space with us, which sounds like a different partner. It's basically a group interested in nature conservancy, but they're a great tenant and they're growing. And so we're trying to accommodate their growth. We have a school in our space called the Rowan Tree School. It's a private school kind of focused on taking advantage of the outdoors. So their students spend a lot of time outside, even in the winter months. So you drive over to the Mount Community Center anytime during the day and you're going to see kids all over the place. And right now, I think they've got students from the toddlers, which is even pre-kindergarten, as I understand, up to grade 6 in our building. Just a massive number of young people in the building. And of course, that kind of comes back to the whole intergenerational piece and diversity of people coming and going in the building. We have St. Paul's Presbyterian Church, which has been an anchor tenant an amazing group to be working with. They're actually looking at social enterprise. They're engaged in the Raw Carrot program that you probably know something about. Well, it's a pleasure to work with them, and we're so supportive after they lost their church got condemned, even though it was a beautiful historic building, and it came down right before their eyes. And we provided them with accommodation, and they're still there today. So they pay the commercial rents, and they also supply great services. We also have 7 acres of green space ready to go, and we've often talked about that. We've talked about housing for the most marginalized. We've talked about housing for low-income seniors, because when I was told by the Community Development Training Center, they described it as a senior tsunami is coming. So we have to be ready for it. And they encouraged us to look at a bill that would be geared towards low-income seniors. That may happen. I don't know. I think we would develop it for the greatest community need. There's also parts in our building, like chapel there. We call that the Austin Doran Hall now, getting away from the Catholic theme, because this is a secular development. It's not a Catholic theme anymore. So we're trying to get away from sort of the denominational piece, but just magnificent spaces. And actually that space there, the sisters had it as a sort of a spirituality center when they were there, but that has been converted into the JK program for the Rowan Tree School, which is amazing. So just one final point, and then I'll stop. The Mount Community Center and the PPRN, we never stop thinking. We're always wondering about what's the next Mount project. So we're always looking for opportunities. And the PPRN especially was introduced to a property owned by the United Church of Canada. So it was a property owned by the Trinity United Church, which was in the central part of the city. Their congregation decided they're going to disband last year. And so the PPRN sat down with the trustees and the membership, and we worked on a plan to buy that church, and we did. We using, oddly enough, the same models that we used when we purchased the Mount Community Center. We bought that church to create a center for mental health and addictions, because it's right in the downtown core. Our downtown doesn't probably look any different from most of your downtowns if you live in an urban area. And we created a space to hopefully help out in some way with those who are struggling with lack of housing, mental health, and addiction. So this is becoming our next Mount, and then there'll be another Mount after that. As long as you can encourage people to work together, good things can happen for sure. So as I keep telling our group, just think big, dare to dream, the blue sky thinking, think outside the box, and something might come of that. And there may be somebody out there that can put the plan together for you. I'll conclude with a selfish request. It's been suggested to us for many years that we should write a book about this story. And we've done that. We're writing a book that takes us up to basically the build out of the food center. It's supposed to be in publication later this summer. So anybody might be interested in more detail than what I've offered, which is maybe a lot. There's a book that's going to be available in the summer for anybody who's interested. So John, I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Wow, that was very inspiring. You guys have done amazing work in just a little over 10 years. Incredible. I think what it really says is how important community is. Like, you really understand community. And I thought maybe, Stephen, we could start the conversation, and we'll get questions from other people as well. But I thought we could start you said a couple of times the importance of relationships. At one point you said you have to get the right people in the right place. And it seems to me all of what you've done is very much about relationship building. I wonder if you might talk a little bit more about that, because it seems like that's the master underlying thing that you guys do so well.
It's true, and in some ways with these projects, we've been kind of lucky, because I've been involved in projects before where not everybody is a line point that way, and we all have been involved with projects like that before, and they can get off the rails in a hurry, and you can have disruptive personalities in that. But if you are putting a plan together, it's important to have groups that are thinking the same way. So even though, you know, the PPRN had like 200 people, they weren't all going to be completely cooperative with one another, but they bought into the plan, the ideal. And I think, John, it's the ideal that was bringing our group together. Yes, there were times when, you know, as the chair, I would go around asking people for help. There were times when you need the right people to help you. So we needed finance people on that due diligence committee. So I would reach out to our agencies to see if they'd make their CFOs available. You do have to put the right people in the right jobs. And that friend of mine, the chief building official, who's still with us today, I remember walking down the hallway in A-Wing, and we were trying to save on some money, and a bunch of us volunteers were taking ceiling tiles down in like 2013, and he was there, chief building official, taking down ceiling tiles, and he's still with us. So yes, he was the right person, he had the right personality, but he had a tremendous background, and he's an accessibility expert. So he keeps our feet to the fire in terms of making sure that not only are we building out minimum accessibility targets, but we're going beyond.
Mhm. So do you have staff that are on the ground coordinating day-to-day operations?
At the Mount Community Center, we have a very small staff, and so unfortunately, if that's the right way to put it, we, the board, we're still an operational board because we're still building out the space. I mean, you know, we have to watch our budgeting, and the last year has been particularly punishing for so many of our nonprofits with the increase in utilities, taxes, insurance, and the rates of interest have been just, you know, very, very, very difficult for all of us to handle. But we've always had a small staff, so we try not to tax them any more than we have to. So our board particularly, and many of our volunteers are still looking after some of these assignments going forward. I'm still involved every daily on the financial stuff. We've got a wonderful group. I didn't talk about them, but we call them the Mount Crew. Former Mayor Paul Ayat that I talked about before, he's a member of the Mount Crew. These are retired individuals. They could be teachers or professors or whatever they might be. They just want to get their hands dirty. So they're there painting walls and doing minor carpentry. So, you know, they're doing a lot of work that we don't have to pay for and that our staff don't have to be worried about. So we're still very involved, and we'll probably be an operational board, not really thinking too much about becoming a strategic board, probably until these next 11 apartments are built out. And at that point, I think the board would really like to be able to step back and turn the management over to a senior administrative team.
Mhm. Mhm. I wonder if there are questions from people who've been listening to this very inspiring presentation. It's
John, somebody asked what the name of the book is.
Well, I can tell you, I've seen the book cover, and I think there's a section of the title that I can't remember, but you know what? Miracle on Monaghan Road is front and center.
okay.
Because-
We will get the name of it, and we will let people know, because that's going
Please do that, because we're taking pre-orders now. I can't believe it. It's just amazing, but it's a wonderful story. And the person writing it, I kind of wanted the factual history that our path has meant a lot to me, but people were saying, no, it's more than just the path of travel, you know, it's about personal experiences. And so this lady has been interviewing a lot of our, like Jeff, the chief building official. She's been interviewing a lot of people to get their personal reflections on this growth. And that's going to come out in the book. So it's going to be a pretty amazing read, I think. Yeah.
Excellent.
So I'd love to send you the details of the book.
That would be great. We'll get that around to people.
Yeah.
Stephen, what's really interesting too is the diversity of the people who are living there.
Yes.
Maybe say a little bit more about that. I mean, how are people getting along? What's the sense of community that we might feel if we went for a visit?
Well, it is a diverse population, and I would say that in phase one, as I say, most of the individuals were single adults, but we had continuing relationships. As an example, with CMHA, we offered 5 of our units to CMHA for 5 of their clients. They had to be low acuity clients. That's all there was to it to fit in that model, but that was fine for CMHA. KPP, Court of Participation, we made 8 units available for them. fully accessible for their clients. So, I mean, talk about the diversity. The diversity includes, for the most part, adults, although not adults, some of them are younger persons living in that phase of the building, but they're coming with challenges, mental health challenges through CMHA. And so we're continuing to expand those connections. So the diversity speaks to the income, it speaks to the types and sizes of apartments. And we're expanding the connections that we have now with the city dealing with the homeless issue. So we've always been open to trying to meet the community's greatest needs, but at the same time, you have to be careful that you're not prejudicing the relationships you already have in the building. And I'll be honest, we've had challenges. When you have that many people moving into your building, you're going to have personality issues. You're going to have things going on that you had never envisioned. I won't get into some of those details, but you deal with them as best you can. I'd say the one thing too about the Mel Community Center, and I've struggled with this with our tenant service committee, but the committee has become friends with our tenants. And I keep warning them, you got to be careful about becoming friends because that creates expectations. Remember, we're the landlord. But you know, establishing those relationships has been huge because many people that have moved into the Mel Community Center, they've come from very unfortunate situations and they're not particularly trustworthy of anyone or anything. So it takes a while to build up that trust. And our committee's been very good at reaching out to them, making friends, having social Christmas parties, that kind of stuff. I mean, they don't buy into it immediately. You have to build up that trust, but we've been successful doing that. Whereas a typical landlord may not even care about that kind of stuff. But to us, it's important and it may have a positive effect on somebody that might otherwise be struggling.
John, Judith Grossman has her hand up.
Yes, Judith, your comment?
Yeah, well, as everybody said, this is very inspiring to hear about and all the work you put into it. My comment is going to be about the financial end, and I admit I'm not a person who is not aware of financing and banking, mortgage loans, housing, etc. But I was briefly, well, more than briefly, but involved with the co-housing community that was trying to get something built. And I was so struck at how hard it was to have get any funding or backing from banks or even qualify properly for federal programs, you know. Like if you're building something or trying to put together something that doesn't fit the mold, you're already facing an uphill battle. So I imagine, so that's what you did, a different way, you know. You took a lot of time and were very thoughtful and probably had more expertise than this group did. So I'm very impressed and kind of curious because I find it frustrating, you know, real estate and developers and banks, and it's like all as if there's only one way to do it, you know, one model, and they're so resistant, I think, to other ways of doing things. And you circumvented that till the point where you had the funding, a certain basic funding in place to deal with the banks, kind of. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think if you're dealing with the banks, you're not going to twist their arms to making any other types of decisions than the ones they're accustomed to making.
Yeah.
You just have to come prepared when you talk to them. And that was our dream about finishing phase one somehow, some way, get her done. And that would give us financial integrity. But I think in terms of the broader picture, just incenting groups like ours and others to take on these projects, you might not have a lot of money in the bank, but you may have a property that gives you some equity and value. You may have a wonderful plan that's only going to succeed in your community. It would be great if, and I hate to keep drawing on government because I mean, that's what we always do, but there are things government can be doing to sort of expedite that without actually having to cut us checks and stuff. But I think there could be more work done on that to make the development of these kinds of nonprofit things a little easier to manage.
I guess if you can't, if it's difficult to articulate it, right? I mean, you now know it, people on your various, whatever boards know it. Some of the government people might have, or municipal people might have known what you're talking about, but like to an average person in the street who doesn't even understand current, usual, typical real estate and developing and, buying and mortgages sometimes. It's so hard to get a handle on the language and see what you need, so that's what I struggle with. I wish that it was, like you said, you're talking about governments being able to incentivize groups to, or lending institutions or whatever, to put on different thinking hats. I'm also thinking, just, it's a different example, but cooperatives. Whoever hears about cooperatives, do they teach about cooperatives in business schools or in law school? No. And yet it is a potentially viable model sometimes in certain circumstances, but we don't even hear about it. We don't have the language to discuss it, right?
And it kind of comes back to John's earlier point that these are challenging things that if it's a nonprofit group, we have to deal with these things. And not all of us are going to have the expertise in all these areas. You just have to make sure that you identify an issue such as, I got to go get a bank mortgage. Who's the best lead I can find to make that happen? So like when we were putting our due diligence committees together, we knew who we wanted. We knew the experts that could help us with the decision-making, drafting the pro formas, the cash flow projections, the capital budget. Not everybody in our group can do that. But not everybody in our group can look at one weather and tell the difference between it and another one. So you just put your teams together, identify what the challenges are, and you'll put the teams together with the expertise. So not everybody really has to know everything about the project.
All right, thank you.
I should just add too, Stephen, that there's actually quite a lot of material now on social financing, and you did that in the early years where you realized you had to have some tenants who actually paid a little bit more than their share to subsidize some of the other work. Like that's creative financing.
Yes. Yeah.
John, I put my hand up because I wondered if others in the group might also be interested about this. That shared dreams model is spectacular. There's 10-year waiting lists for people with developmental disabilities to be able to access any kind of supportive housing. And what you folks accomplished in achieving that as part of an integrated setting, because so often people are segregated, to do it as part of an integrated setting so that people could be part of the community, that's a fantastic model. And John, I'm just thinking, maybe it's time to give Community Living Ontario the heads up that the Mount has done this, because I think it's something that needs to be advertised more broadly in the province. I mean, what are your thoughts, John?
Well, yeah, it's a terrific story. And I think there's a lot of family groups around the province that have, sons and daughters with disabilities who would love to learn about that story. So again, I think when your book comes out, that'll be a part of it, I'm sure.
Well, I can tell you, Trish and John, that a few years ago, we had somebody from Community Living Ontario. If there's a CEO, that's who it was, came to visit us in Peterborough, and he thought this was a magnificent development for adult persons with disability. And he said, we have to get away from, I think he called it like the apartment tower complex. We're going to put them all in this apartment building, and he thought this was a wonderful model that should be replicated elsewhere. So I think they're aware of it, and I think they've got their hands on it, if that same person is still associated with the executive group. We've also got other families in our area. One family in particular, a group of families, they bought their own home, and they've got a round-the-clock support worker in there. And these are adult daughters that are living together. But, it's hard to make it sustainable without having additional fundraising. But they actually have linked up with Community Living, as I think Shared Dreams may have too, in terms of helping them with some of their supports.
I'm wondering if there are other questions.
There's some inspiring comments, Steve. I hope you read the chat when you're done.
Yes,
I haven't had a chance.
People have been saying some very nice things.
Well, just in terms of the comment about cooperatives, the federal government for the first time since the early 90s has had actually in their budget this year have money for cooperatives. So, you know, and we've actually done a webinar. SSAO has done a webinar on cooperatives. So that's something that people can certainly pursue. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for this talk. It's there's just a lot to think about and all the different layers. I think the creative financing, the relationships, the community development, and the way you've outreached to different groups in the community. Thank you so much. Number one, for all the work you've done as president and chair for so long. That's incredible. And so thank you for sharing with all of our members.
Thank you for having me.
Before ending, can I just ask a quick question? Like, it's wonderful that you've committed your time, and I know being a lawyer is a bit of a onerous task. So I'm wondering if you are aware of other lawyers that have the same commitment that you have across Ontario that would be willing to participate, lead a group in their own communities in trying to work collaboratively with their municipalities and with their community agencies in getting something like that started in their own communities.
No, I don't think I do, and I wish I did. Not lawyers specifically, but we've had some tremendous groups come visit us to better understand how we did it. And there was a group from Kingston who is redeveloping, I think, Providence Villa, and they're going to have a different diverse group of uses there. But golly, when those people came here, we had a previous minister of the Ontario Crown, we had a mayor. There are leaders in the community that are prepared to get their hands dirty, but it's hard to know unless you're introduced to other communities that have these. We all have community leaders, but it's the ones that are really that will lead the charge for you that you need to find it. And no, I haven't come across any other lawyers across Ontario that might take the same kind of lead. But you can find those. They don't all have to be lawyers. You just need somebody to take the leadership, to lead the charge, to do what this group does here is coordinate developments and conversation about some of these issues.
That's great. It's too bad the Law Society, I agree with you, but there's a lot of credence that goes to a lawyer and also a lot of skill that costs money. So it's too bad the Law Society didn't embrace this. You know, the membership within the Law Society didn't embrace something like this. And not that I'm giving you a project, but it would be lovely.
Well,
He doesn't need any more projects.
Well, and they probably don't pay attention locally to these kinds of things, but it's a very good point that large regulatory bodies like the Law Society should be getting behind these things and supporting them, at least policy-wise. Maybe they can't get out there and do the bills, but they can understand things like social financing and sending REITs for investment or whatever it might be. They can definitely be part of the advocacy. Yeah, we're electing our new benchers right now, so maybe I get to ask a few of them a question here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, and I think Stephen, as you said a couple of times, every community has leaders. And so partly what we're doing as a Seniors for Social Action, we're trying to mobilize communities, right? We're trying to help elders and anybody else who work together for change. And that's the way change happens. So thank you again. And
You're
thanks
welcome.
everybody for participating. And we'll see you all again for another webinar.
I'll let you know the name of the book, Trish and John.
Please do, because we'll advertise it for you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a wonderful
And if
presentation.
anybody has any follow-up questions, John, at all, my email is probably available. I'm
Yeah.
always willing to chat about these things.
Okay.
If there's anything to be gained from that. So
We'll send them along.
We'll
Terrific.
definitely do that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks a lot. Good night, everybody.
Harry, do I hang around now or do I go?